So we begin with the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita today. We have gone through 12 amazing weeks of 12 chapters. The 12th chapter is especially wonderful. The middle six chapters are on the topic of loving devotion or bhakti yoga, and they are considered the treasure in the treasure chest of Bhagavad Gita, whereas the first six and the last six chapters are the chest itself. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who gives us this example, also tells us that the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is on the devotee or the bhakta, is especially special. It's a very short chapter. Yamana Jivana Prabhu did an amazing job of taking us through that. There were three topics essentially in this 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Just to summarize and remind us, the first was initiated by Arjuna. Arjuna is the most wonderful, inquisitive hearer of the Bhagavad Gita, the surrendered soul unto Krishna who is qualified and fit to receive this transcendental knowledge. Anyone is qualified to receive this knowledge. The only requisition that Krishna makes of such a person is he should be anasuyave. We see this in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, I speak 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. At the beginning, Krishna says, I will speak further confidential truths unto you because you are my friend Arjuna and you are anasuyave. Anasuyave means non-envious. Envy arises from ignorance, and ignorance is the root cause of all suffering. And from ignorance comes ignorant desire or material desire. So such a person who is Arjuna, and he is asking based on what was spoken in the 11th chapter. In the 11th chapter, Krishna showed three of his transcendental forms. He showed himself as the universal cosmic form. He also showed himself in the Chaturbhuja, the four-handed, and the Dvibhuja, the two-handed forms. We went through this. 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, just like chapter 11 is bankruptcy in the American corporate code. 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, for those who retain onto misconceptions, when it is realized properly, can bankrupt us of those unwanted misconceptions. 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita begins with, hence, the question, which is superior, impersonal or personal worship. Krishna clarifies, a personalist who considers me an individual and the supreme is higher than one who considers the absolute truth, the summum bonum, as an impersonal Brahmajyoti or Brahman, as it is commonly known. Krishna then goes on to classify the different levels of devotion or bhakti. And he extols the virtues of the devotee in the last 8 verses of the 12th chapter, very celebrated verses of the Bhagavad Gita. In classifying the different types of worshippers, he calls out the Ananya Bhakta, or Ananya means unadulterated or undivided. Just like in this world, if we have someone we love, they will be our only partner. Love cannot be divided and yet pure. Just like that, in the spiritual realm, in spiritual life, our love for God has to be undivided. Love for Krishna has to be undivided, to be pure. And that's called Uttama Bhakti. In fact, there's a beautiful verse in a book called Nectar of Devotion, which Srila Prabhupada also translated, which defines this Uttama Bhakti. Anya Vilasita Sunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavardam Anukulyena Krishna Anushilanam Bhaktir Uttama. Anya Bilasita Sunyam means without any tinge of material motive. Jnana Karmadi Anavritam means beyond the need for fruitive activities, which is karma, and mental speculation, which is jnana. Anukulyena Krishna Nishinanam means fully ready to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. This is Uttama Bhakti, writes Rupa Goswami and translates Srila Prabhupada. Lower than that form of bhakti is mixed devotion, where one is not anya bilasita sunyam, one is not at a state where he has no material motives. He still might have some material motives, like perhaps all of us, but he is still acting on the platform of transcendental knowledge and trying to elevate himself spiritually. That is Mishra Bhakti or mixed devotion. Then there is the worship of the universal form. Krishna shows the cosmic form, and those who worship him are the next level. Then there is demigod worship. Then there is finally impersonal worship. So Krishna clarifies that in the 12th chapter. This structure of the Bhagavad Gita, a word on the structure of the Bhagavad Gita before we get into the 13th chapter. There are primarily three sections of the Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 chapters on the topic of work or karma or the journey of the individual. We saw these 6 chapters in detail already. And then the last 6 chapters, which we are going to see on the topic of jnana or knowledge. Both jnana and karma should lead to loving devotion. First 6 chapters and the last 6 chapters are meant to help us lead towards bhakti, which is contained in the middle 6 chapters, which we just started, which we just finished describing. Why? Because the ultimate goal is to develop pure love, and pure love can be developed only unto he who is pure, which is Krishna. And even if one, through work, through karma, or through knowledge, is able to constantly remember Krishna, that need not be from the point of love. It can be from the point of awe and reverence and so many other moods. But ultimate goal is for that to develop and blossom into prema. There's a beautiful book by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur who gives us the analogy of the treasure chest. It's called Madhurya Kadamini, in which the various levels of bhakti are described. And the bhakti or love begins with Shraddha, Ado Shraddha. So at the beginning there is Shraddha. Shraddha means faith. It's like a seed that is planted in the fertile heart, in the humble heart of the person who wants to pursue this loving devotion. We will see today the fertility of the heart, what that means. In verses 8 to 12 of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the process of knowledge is described, and one who contains the 20 items of the process of knowledge has a fertile heart. And in such a heart, in such a humble heart, the seed of faith is planted, and by sadhu sangha, which is association unto like-minded persons and persons who are advanced in spiritual loving devotion, the seed is watered and slowly it grows into a creeper. And the ultimate, and this creeper is called Bhakti Lata Beach. The seed is called Bhakti Beach. And ultimately this blossoms into a flower which is known as Prema or love unto the Supreme Person. So just like that, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has brilliantly structured to help us go from, first of all, understand who we are, understand what this world is, understand what our duty is, but also understand our constitutional position is to love Him, and slowly He builds us up to the point where the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he will conclude by saying, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Aham tum sarva papebhyo mokshe yeshami ma suchaha. That means, please abandon all varieties of religion, all varieties of dharma, O Krishna, O Arjuna, and just surrender unto me. Moksha yeshami masuchaha. Do not worry, I will take you beyond this realm of lamentation and sadness and suffering. So Krishna ultimately goes there in the 18th chapter, the final chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is how he structures this 18 chapters to get us there. So complete knowledge thus includes knowledge of ourselves, the living entity or jiva, knowledge of God or Ishvara, the summum bonum, the absolute truth, and knowledge of material nature or prakriti, and the sambandha or the interactions or the relationship between each of these three entities. In the first 6 chapters, Krishna is focused on the journey of the jiva. It began with the doubt of Arjuna, and then it slowly built up to meditation, dhyana, in the 6th chapter, control of the mind. In the 2nd chapter itself, he talked about the identity of who we are. We are not this body, we are not this mind, we are that which is subtle and eternal and full of knowledge and bliss in the constitutional position. And in the middle 6 chapters, Krishna talked about himself. Sutre Mani Gananiva, just like the thread holds the pearls together in a pearl necklace, even though we don't see the thread. Just like that, Krishna holds everything together. He is the essence of everything. He is simultaneously eminent and transcendent. He is present everywhere as Paramatma, including the heart of every living entity. Yet, he is aloof from all of material nature. So that was the middle 6 chapters Krishna described about himself. And like I just summarized, in the 12th chapter, he described his devotee. Finally, the final 6 chapters will focus on this topic of material nature or Prakriti, and what is the relationship between Prakriti and us, the Jiva. What is the relationship between Prakriti and Ishvara, the Supreme Person. Another way to look at this last 6 chapters is through these wonderful topics. So today's chapter will be on the witness. Very, very interesting. Shankaracharya, Sripad Shankaracharya, very interestingly, he titled this chapter as Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga, or Yoga of Discrimination. So we'll see about these topics. What is Kshetra or field? Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. Neya, Jnana, and Purusha and Prakriti. I will explain these terms soon as we proceed with the 13th chapter. Here we go. Arjuna is asking about these 6 terms already. Prakritim Purusham Chaiva, Kshetram Kshetrajnam Evacha, Etad Veditum Ichchami, Jnanam Nyayam Cha Keshava. So 6 topics he's asking about. Oh my dear Krishna, O Keshava, I wish to know about 1. Prakriti or material nature, 2. Purusha or the enjoyer, and Prakriti here might refer to the enjoyed also, need not just refer to material nature. Kshetra and Kshetrajna, the field of activity and the knower of the field of activity. And Jnanam and Nyayam, of knowledge and the object of knowledge. Very, very important to understand the differentiation between these. As I describe these, it will perhaps become more clear to you why this is important. And Krishna immediately responds in the 2nd verse, this body is Kshetra. Just like this farmer works in the land, and the land is the field of the work of the farmer. Just like that, we sitting in this body work through this body in this life. So this body is Kshetra, the field of our farming. And who is Kshetrajna? Kshetrajna, Krishna says, means one who knows the body. So that is the individual soul, the jiva, the real us. We are not this body. We are an eternal spark of consciousness or energy called Atma. Okay? As that Atma or Jiva, we are the knower of our body. But Arjuna immediately confirms, is there just one knower of the body? Krishna says, no, no, I am also the knower of, I am also the knower. I am also Kshetrajna. And Arjuna wants to know what is the difference between you, the Ishvara, who is the knower of the body, Kshetrajna, and me, the Jiva, who is also Kshetrajna. Krishna says immediately, I am the knower of all bodies, whereas the Jiva is only the knower of his own body. Very interesting. And the example is given to us by our acharyas of the farmer. The farmer knows his field, whereas there is the king. The king might not directly be doing the farming and be using the field as his kshetra, but the king knows and owns all the fields in the kingdom. Just like that, the super soul or Paramatma knows all bodies, whereas the soul knows of his body, is the knower of his body, and is hence Kshetrajna. Whereas the super soul knows all the bodies, and hence this knowledge of the body or Prakriti, soul or Jiva, and super soul or Ishvara together is known as Jnana. I already described these three terminologies and said how this is complete knowledge, and this is a different way of getting at the same. So unless we acquire the knowledge of the soul and the super soul, that is spiritual knowledge, then no matter how much knowledge we have, it remains incomplete. We can know the workings of a quantum computer. We can understand M theory or string theory. We can win the Fields Medal in mathematics because we came up with the solution for one of the most perplexing problems in mathematics, perhaps. But our knowledge is not complete until we understand ourselves, the soul, and until we understand God, the super soul. And unless our knowledge is not complete, we cannot perfect ourselves, we cannot experience pure love of the Supreme. Arjuna wants to know a little bit more about Kshetra, the body. You told me Kshetra is the body, but please can you explain more? Krishna says, okay, but very briefly, I have to finish this and we have to get to the Kurukshetra battle, perhaps Krishna is thinking. And Arjuna says, just out of curiosity, where can one get detailed description of this? And Krishna says you can find detailed description of the body in the Vedanta Sutras. Very quickly, from the Vedanta Sutras and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, this is what is given to us. There are 24 elements from which the Kshetra is made out of. Kshetra means not just the gross body, that which we touch and feel and the internal organs. There is also this subtle body, mind, intellect, false ego. Okay. This body is made from the material elements on the periodic table, the Panchabhutas, earth, water, fire, air, ether. It contains 5 knowledge acquiring senses or jnana indriyas and 5 working senses or karma indriyas. And there are 5 sense objects: smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. And there are 4 subtle elements: mind, intellect, false ego, and pradhana, which is material nature. These are the very, this It's part of Sankhya Yoga by Kapila Muni in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it is dealt with in a very elaborate way. I have the third canto right in front of me. The book is about this big, and it's a very involved subject matter, but I'm just giving you a taste of what is to be known from reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. The field, as opposed to the knower of the field, experiences birth. Everything in this world has a birth date, whether it's a worm, whether it's a bird or an insect or an animal or one of us or our children. We all have a birth date and a death date. And between this birth and death, there are four kinds of transformations that the body undergoes. It grows, it's maintained, it produces byproducts, sometimes very unpleasant byproducts, and it deteriorates. Everything, ladies and gentlemen, in this world deteriorates. That's the nature of this world. We will see later on in this final 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita the nature of this world, and everything in this world deteriorates. So Krishna calls this world Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. Very poignant. Dukkhalayam means a place of suffering, and Ashashvatam means an ephemeral place, a temporary place. There is nothing permanent about this world. So, because the body is part of this world, there is deterioration. Just a sample of what is Kshetra from the Vedanta Sutras. So this made me think, and I googled, because many people think like this: why God made me in this way? Why God made me like this? And you can see there are so many Google suggestions on this topic. So we look in the mirror and we think why God made us like this, and we absolve ourselves sometimes of responsibility. It is on God that He made us like this. That's not actually true. It is due to our own karma and desires that we have this body. So whether we have a body of Usain Bolt and we are super healthy and super athletic, or whether we have a body which is troublesome and has some issues, we take responsibility for that. We receive this body because of our own karma. Whatever we are and however our body is, it is all because of our own actions. This is not to blame the victim, because some people sometimes when we say this in public, people say, I know of this person who was born handicapped, you know, at his birth itself. So are you saying it is his own fault that he is handicapped? This is not to blame that person, that handicapped person, or anything like that. This is just reality. Because when a person understands this, the tendency to complain goes away, and the attitude changes towards focusing on life, because it is our own responsibility. Very important. Of course, all our actions and desires are like seeds. Just like in this picture, this person has taken various earthen pots and planted a seed, and different seed each time, and he waters those seeds. And the plants, will it all grow the same? No, of course not. The seeds are all different. The conditions in which the seeds were planted are all different. The pots are different. Perhaps the sunlight it receives is slightly different. So just like that, we plant various seeds. Every one of our words is a verbal seed that we plant. Every one of our actions is an action seed that we plant. And hence we have to be careful what desires we have, what we speak. We have to be very careful. Otherwise, we'll plant seeds we don't want to sow. We don't want to reap. Sorry. So, but every seed will lead to a different result. That's the important thing to know. So Kshetra, immediately Arjuna asks a very brilliant question. One thing that happens when you repeatedly read the Bhagavad Gita is you appreciate Arjuna so much. Without him, all these topics would not have been discussed by Krishna in this way. And just the way in which they are described is so wonderful. The flow, the pravaha, as it is known, of the Bhagavad Gita is so beautiful, and that's thanks to Arjuna. I appreciate Arjuna so much. His qualities, his questions. He asks exactly the question I would ask. I am the Kshetrajna, and in my unconditioned state, I am without shackles. I am full of knowledge, I am full of bliss, even if I am infinitesimally small, even if I am just a spark, I am without limitation. Whereas I am in this body right now with this Kshetra, and this body is so limiting. How do I transcend this body? Beautiful question. And Krishna immediately says Jnanam, which is the third topic. We already saw Kshetra and Kshetrajna. Jnanam and Neyam are the third and fourth topics. Jnanam means knowledge. I see. How do you acquire that knowledge, O Krishna? Arjuna asks. And then the seminal verses 8 to 12. Please read the Bhagavad Gita as it is, the commentary and the translation and the verses 8 to 12. I'll just recite the 8th verse, but I will read the translation for 8 to 12. Amanitvam adampitvam ahimsa shantirarjavam acharyopasanam saucham shaitriyam atmavinigraha. Beautiful verse. So in response to Arjuna's question, how to acquire that knowledge, Krishna is saying, Amanitvam, humility, Adambitvam, pridelessness, Ahimsa, non-violence, Shanti, peace, Arjavam, Acharya Upasanam, Saucham. He is describing to us 20 qualities in these verses 8 to 12, which are the root of knowledge. And the first of those qualities, ladies and gentlemen, is humility. Humility means accepting that we are infinitesimal, Krishna is infinite, and we cannot by our own strength acquire this knowledge. That is humility. Humility is also described as not wanting to be honored by others. That comes from the understanding that we are not supreme. We are part and parcel of the infinite supreme person. Mamevamso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita we will read in the next week. And in that 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it is described that we are eternally, Krishna describes that you, Arjuna, are eternally part and parcel of me, all you living entities, just like a big machine and the spare parts of the machine. We are the spare parts which are part of the machine. Just like that. Understanding that is humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching Acharya Upasanam. We saw in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Well, it is so important to approach a spiritual teacher, a guru, and understand this transcendental knowledge. Krishna, even though he is present right in front of Arjuna, he is telling Arjuna, oh Arjuna, go find a person who has walked the path and let him reveal this knowledge to you. So even though Krishna is in every one of our hearts, he might not be in front of us like he is in front of Arjuna. He is in our heart though. Even though he is in front of, in our heart, we still require a guru or a spiritual teacher to understand this knowledge. Cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation, absence of false ego, perception of evil, detachment, freedom from entanglement, even-mindedness, constant and unalloyed devotion to me. Very interesting. Aspiring to live in a lonely place, detached from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of spiritual realization, philosophical search for the absolute truth. These I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is of ignorance. So, what we study in school for so many years, in my case, mechanical engineering, finite time thermodynamics, uh, fluid mechanics, all the things that I studied in school is actually secondary. It's not core knowledge. Core knowledge means humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance. Very, very important verses of the Bhagavad Gita. In order to awaken spiritual knowledge, these 20 qualities have to be duly accepted. Very wonderful. And Arjuna immediately, like he loves this description and he is slightly smiling and he is asking what is to be known by these qualities. And Krishna comes to the sixth topic that Arjuna brought up in the first verse. Again, he brought up Kshetrajna, the field of activities, the knower of the field of activities. He brought up Purusha and Prakriti, which we will see later on. But he also brought up Jnana and Jnaya. Jnanam is described as the 20 items of knowledge, beginning with humility. Jnaya is the person who acquires this knowledge. And that person is known as Brahman. There are two kinds of Brahman. Jiva Brahman, which is us, Jiva Atma or soul, and Parabrahman or Paramatma. So this is a little involved and technical, but important to understand. So the object of knowledge and one who knows the knowledge are separate in this world. For example, I might buy a camera. The camera might come with a instruction manual, and when I read the instruction manual, I am the one who knows, and the object of my knowledge is the camera. Okay, but in the case of transcendence, the knower and the object of the knowledge are one and the same. The jnanam and jnaya are one and the same. That is why it's called self-realization. Without understanding ourselves, we cannot understand the Supreme Person, Parabrahman, or this material world, Prakriti. Very important to understand that with our spiritual pursuits, the knower of the knowledge and the object of knowledge are one and the same. Unlike in this material world, we are so trained, so used to the knower of the knowledge being separate from the object of knowledge. We know we are the knower of the knowledge. We always think of other things as the object of knowledge. Bhagavad Gita is a book on inner work. How do you? It's a manual of life, and the manual of life is telling us to work on ourselves, within ourselves. Happiness is an inside job. Very, very important. The second knower is Paramatma, and Paramatma is omnipresent. He is present everywhere, and because he is omnipresent, he is also omniscient. There is a very often question that comes. So Paramatma is present in the heart of all living entities. So there are as many Paramatmas as there are living entities. Actually, no. There's only one Paramatma in all our heart together. Example is given of the sunlight. So the sun is one, but the sunlight might be captured in many pots, as you can see in this picture. But in each of these pots, the sunlight is not divided. It's all one sunlight. Just like that, Paramatma is in all our hearts, hearts of all living entities of all species of life. But he is not divided. He is one. Very important. Prakriti and Purusha, the first two topics. So we have addressed four topics now. There are only two topics left of the question of Arjuna in the first verse. Prakriti and Purusha A Prakriti is one that is to be enjoyed, and Purusha is one who enjoys. They are both my energies, says Krishna in the 19th verse. And immediately Arjuna asks very important question. How can Purusha be energy? If it is energy, then should it not be called Prakriti? Because Prakriti, energy is to be enjoyed. Energetic is the enjoyer. So the only enjoyer is actually the Supreme Lord. We are all His energies. We are to be enjoyed. That is our bliss, is to be enjoyed by Him. But in the conditioned state, because of ignorance, avidya, that is the root cause of all suffering, as I said before. Because of that, we think of ourselves as the enjoyer. This is not, we are not the real enjoyer, we are the imitation Purusha. We are not, but we are still constitutionally his energy. So Prakriti and the imitation Purusha are both my energies, is what Krishna is saying. Out of ignorance, the conditioned soul considers itself to be the supreme enjoyer. In this world, there is no point, ladies and gentlemen, of trying to enjoy out of turn. Of course, bliss and happiness is the root, but enjoying via the material elements is ephemeral enjoyment, and it comes within the duality of enjoyment, cycling between enjoyment and sadness continuously. So, what's the point? So, if we can go beyond this sense of material enjoyment, we can actually begin to see and attain spiritual, eternal bliss and enjoyment. The living entity in material nature thus follows the way of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, he meets with good and evil among various species. So, this is the relationship between material nature and the living entity that is being described. As I promised, this last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita is on Prakriti, material nature, and the relationship of Ishvara and Jiva with Prakriti. This is the relationship between Jiva and Prakriti. Very interestingly here, if you think about it, good and evil are on the same platform in some ways. Whether one does good or evil within this world, it keeps one tied to the cycle of birth and death. Of course, acting on the mode of sattva guna or goodness is better than acting on the modes of passion or ignorance, rajo or tamo guna. But even sattva guna binds one to this world because there is karmic reaction to sattva guna. We get good reaction, of course. We receive good things when we act in a good way, but that good things bind us. We become attached to those good things. Whereas if we do evil things, for example, it gives us negative reaction, and that also binds us to this world. The point of the Bhagavad Gita, the point of spiritual life, is go beyond the platform of good and evil. This is why one who is an actual knowledgeable person understands and sees everyone equally. We saw that beautiful verse, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, Brahmine Gavyahastini Suni Chaiva Swapakecha, Pandita Samadarshana. Pandita, or a truly learned person, sees as equal an elephant, a cow eater, a brahmana, and so on. He sees every living entity as equal because he is beyond the definitions of duality, good and evil, and hot and cold, and so on. It is said such a person even sees as equal a stone, a precious gem, and a metal. He understands they are molecularly different and their value in this world might be different, but they are all material for him. He transcends those differences. Very, very wonderful description of Bhagavad Gita. Then Arjuna wants to know, so all conditioned living entities are imitation Purushas. then who is the actual Purusha? Seminal verse, 23rd verse of the Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, 23rd verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, Upadrishta Anumanta cha Bhartha Bhota Maheshwaram Paramatmeti Chapi Yukto Dehismin Purusha Para. Upadrishta Anumanta cha. I, as Paramatma sitting in your heart, is Upadrishta and Anumanta. I am the permitter and overseer of all activities. And I am known as Paramatma, the Super Soul. We saw in the last verse of the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita the peace formula. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam sarva loka maheshwaram suhradam sarva bhutana jnatva mam shanti richati. We have to understand and realize three things in order for us to be perfectly peaceful. One, Bhoktaram yajna tapasam, that the Supreme Lord is the supreme enjoyer. Here also it is mentioned Bharta Bhokta Maheshwar. Second, we should understand that he is the supreme proprietor, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Third, Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam, even though he is the supreme enjoyer and we are not, even though he is the supreme proprietor and we don't own anything, he is still not aloof. He is Suhridam Sarva Bhutani, of all living for all living entities. He is the best friend. A suhrid means not just a friend, a person who would sacrifice himself for the welfare of his beloved friend is a suhrid, and he is a suhrid of all living entities. If we understand these three things, that he is the supreme enjoyer, we are not. He is the supreme proprietor, we are not. He is our best friend. We become perfectly peaceful, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very important verse, the last verse of the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And he is further expanding here in the 23rd chapter of the 13th chapter, 23rd verse, where he is saying he is the overseer and permitter. So in essence, he is like the witness. So we perform these various activities as Kshetrajna, and through the body, the Kshetra, and everything is witnessed by the Supreme Lord. There are laws in this world, and the laws, if there are no laws, there won't be any law and order. People will do whatever they want. And similarly, there are laws of God, and he is witnessing everything, not from the point of view of some person vindictive and trying to punish us, but rather from someone point of view of someone who loves us. Just like a father would put some rules on his child so that the child doesn't go astray, he puts some laws on us so that we come back to him in loving devotional service. The law of karma is designed to make us responsible. If this law didn't exist, there would never be order and peace in society. One may escape after breaking the laws made by man, but one cannot escape after breaking the laws made by God. Quite stringent, but that is reality. On understanding these subjects, a person attains freedom from birth and death. And immediately Arjuna asks, those 6 subjects, if we understand, we can go beyond the conception of birth and death. Krishna is saying. And immediately Arjuna asks, other than this jnana platform, are there other means to attain the goal? And Krishna says, certainly, I have already told you that. In the 6th chapter, I told you about Dhyana Yoga. In the 2nd chapter, I told you about Sankhya Yoga. Dhyana Yoga means yoga of meditation, mind control. Sankhya Yoga refers to the yoga of understanding, self-realization of who we are. Niskama Karma Yoga means the platform of performing work in this world out of love for Krishna without any material desire. And Bhakti Yoga means loving devotion. From these platforms, you can get beyond the cycle of birth and death, Krishna says. One who knows, how does he see? Very interesting question. He sees through Jnana Chakshu. Very. Krishna described this in the previous chapters also, but he is going into more precise description here. Just like, when you go to a doctor, the doctor, if he's especially an Ayurvedic doctor, but also some allopathic doctors, they would take a careful look at your tongue. And one of my friends who is an Ayurvedic doctor told me, the tongue, if you know how to read the tongue, it gives you a map of all internal organs, your gut, your intestines, your liver, everything can be read from the tongue. So, just like that, by understanding Kshetra Kshetrajna, Nyaya, Jnanam and Nyayam, Purusha and Prakriti, a person who has Jnana Chakshu is able to read what is what. Just like a physician is able to read the internals of your body by looking at your tongue. Finally, in the 34th verse, Krishna ends by describing an analogy. He says the sun is the illumination for this planet. Similarly, the soul illuminates this body via consciousness. This is extremely helpful. When we say we are a spark of consciousness, it means we are consciousness and we are conscious. Maybe this is a bit too philosophical, but Krishna says this nonetheless at the end of the 13th chapter. Very important to understand who we are. We are not this body. And any good definition of something explains what it is not and what it is. What we are not is not this body, not this mind, not our intellect, not our ego. We are a spark of consciousness which animates this body. As soon as the spark leaves this body, the body is dead body. That is called death. As soon as the spark enters the womb of the mother, the body is alive. There is conception. So this spark of consciousness doesn't grow or doesn't need to be maintained, doesn't deteriorate. It is antimatter. It is purely spiritual. So all this research in the Large Hadron Collider to find antimatter, or the God particle as scientists call it, is actually the Satchitananda soul, the eternal spark of infinitesimal consciousness that exists. That is the real us. Each one of us is a spark in that way. Those who see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, attain to the supreme goal. So, 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita in itself, the 35 verses, is enough for us to go beyond the suffering of this body, to transcend material nature and to attain spiritual nature. Very important chapter hence. And like I said before, Sripad Shankaracharya called it the yoga of discrimination, or Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga. And it can be thought of as the chapter of witness of the Paramatma. All right. To quickly summarize the first several verses. The first verse, Arjuna asked 6 questions, and Krishna described in the first several verses the field Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Neyam, then Jnanam. And then he describes the process of acquiring knowledge, the 20 items of knowledge. The most important thing to take away from today is knowledge which leads to perfection begins with humility. And it encompasses Acharya Upasana, which is taking a guru or a spiritual master. Then in 13th to 19th verse, he described Neya, or the knower of knowledge. There are 2 knowers of knowledge, the Jiva Brahman, or the soul, and Parabrahman, or the Super Soul. He then described Prakriti and Purusha and their relationship. We are the imitation Purusha. The Super Soul is the original Purusha. Finally, he told us how, through this Jnana Chakshu, or the divine eyes of knowledge that he has given us through this 13th chapter, we can go beyond the cycle of suffering and ephemeral happiness. Very, very wonderful chapter. I hope I did a helpful job of explaining this to all of you. Any questions, comments, thoughts? I will wait. All right, if there is nothing, thank you so much for joining us. Next week, we'll discuss the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Yamuna Prabhu will lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash.
Thank you, Kusum. Thank you, Nilesh. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.